Okay, the verdict is just in, and you've probably seen the news headlines flashed in every major news circuit. The news headlines are, the real estate industry is forever changed. And the reason why they're talking about that is there was essentially an over $5 billion ruling against real estate agents, real estate brokerages, the National Association of Realtors, that was just given out by 8 jurors in Missouri for an antitrust lawsuit against the National Association of Realtors, against RE/MAX, Keller Williams, a variety of other brokerages out there, some of which already settled to exit the suit, and some of which stuck it out and to battle it out, and they have essentially just lost. Now, to start off, it is going to be appealed. That is a guarantee. It may be a number of years until it's settled out, but the size, the sheer amount is staggering, over $5 billion. The actual ruling was $1.78 billion, but with treble damages, that will probably triple by the time it's all said and done. Now, I'm going to break down for you what this actually means for the real estate industry, what it means for you if you're a real estate agent, what it means for you if you're a consumer, if you're a home buyer or a home seller. And I want to warn you that it is not all positive. I'm going to share the pros, I'm going to share the cons, but you want to watch till the end because there's some things that are going to surprise you that are potential ripple effects. So first, this lawsuit started in 2019, and it's an antitrust lawsuit. Again, it was in the state of Missouri, and the general premise was that the National Association of Realtors and these large real estate brokerages and franchises like Berkshire Hathaway, Keller Williams, RE/MAX was in there, the company, the parent company for Sotheby's and some other, that essentially that they were all colluding to fix real estate commissions high. Now, like a lot of lawsuits, people try to find an angle and they think that there's money to be made and they pursue that angle. But I think the overarching kind of core to it was actually, is there even value in real estate agents? Is there even value in having a buyer's agent? And that stemmed a lot of essentially what this trial was. But at the end of it, it was an antitrust lawsuit. Now, the jurors, there was actually 8 jurors that issued this verdict. They only deliberated for like 2.5 hours. And here's the interesting thing. Rumor has it, not sure if it's true or not, that the vast majority of those 8 jurors actually were not even homeowners, which is kind of fascinating when you think about, you have a small group of people determining this amount of money and this potential impact on the real estate industry, and the vast majority of them aren't even homeowners, and they don't probably even fully understand what does the homeownership process look like, why are there real estate agents, what is the history behind real estate agency, how did it develop, how is it there in a lot of ways to protect the consumer, and like a lot of cases, it just gets settled by who happens to be on the jury and what way they get swayed by the attorneys on both sides. Now, just so you know who I am, my name is Daniel Zia. I own a real estate company here in Santa Barbara, California. We've been selling real estate for 18 years. We've sold over $1 billion of real estate, and most people that know me that I don't blow smoke. I'm really a neutral advisor, and again, I'm going to share the good, the bad, and the ugly. So first of all, I think it's important whether you're if you're a consumer and you don't know a lot about real estate agency and real estate commissions to even just know what the basics are. So the basics to start with are, what is a real estate commission? Real estate commission is essentially what a real estate agent or a realtor essentially gets paid when they help someone buy or sell a home, and it is a percentage of the sales price. In most areas, that is between 5 and 7% is the overarching real estate commission. That is something that the way that it has been developed, that the seller hires a seller's agent, also known as a listing agent, signs a listing agreement with that agent and agrees to pay that 5 to 7%. And generally in that very beginning of the residential listing agreement, I know at least here in California, it says very clearly on that what the cooperating commission percentage is going to be. For example, 2.5% to the buyer's agent as the incentive for the agents out there in the market to actually work, in some ways also for the seller to go find a buyer, bring that buyer to the table, walk them through negotiation, walk them through inspections, coach them and guide them through the home purchasing process, hold their hand when needed, and get them to the closing table at the end of the day. Now, even though in some cases the buyer is not paying directly the buyer's agent for that buyer's agency, the fact is, those costs are coming from the seller off of their top sheet, and they're factoring that into their price pricing, and at the end of the day, the buyer is still paying. Now, the buyer, even as it is now, could pay for the buyer's agent commission. They could also pay for the seller's commission, which is really interesting. Sometimes we get a cash buyer that's wanting to drop the purchase price as low as possible and to keep their property tax basis, which is in our area fixed on the sales price in California. They want to keep that low. So sometimes the buyer, when they have all cash and they have the funds to pay for both sides, actually pay for all the commissions and all the closing costs. So that's definitely still a possibility here. So just the very premise of the whole lawsuit, it kind of baffles me. I mean, every time I'm getting a listing agreement signed, I'm walking the seller through some of the basic facts about commissions, that they are negotiable, that it's based on free markets. Here's the range here, and here's what we charge. And interesting fact, at Zia Group, one of the things that we do is we actually let our sellers pick our commission rate. We've got a range of commission options for different marketing plans, and we actually allow the sellers to choose how much marketing they want us to do, and we have corresponding costs associated with that marketing. And also they get to choose how much that cooperating brokerage percentage is going to be, that commission percentage for the buyer's agent, because that's an additional incentivization. And a lot of times sellers are actually choosing to offer the buyer's agent an increased buyer's commission because they want every incentive for a buyer's agent to bring a buyer to their property in particular. So that's just the basic fundamentals. Now, one of the interesting things is, homeowners now, when a homeowner goes to sell a property, yes, they're essentially paying, if you want to call it, for both sides in a general scenario. But when they were buyers and they were able to get into the market, the reality is they didn't actually have that cost directly. And one of the biggest barriers of homeownership today is the down payment and closing costs to get into a purchase. Frankly, that's why there's so many governmental programs for first-time home buyers and home buyers in general to be able to get in. That's the biggest barrier of entry in the vast majority of cases. And homeownership is one of the foundational elements of creating wealth. So just in general, if you think about it, one of the ripple effects of this could be long-term in our industry, that, for example, if the judge rules that the sellers can no longer, the listing agent can no longer operate that cooperating buyer's agent commission, and buyers have to pay that specifically, one of the main things that is actually going to occur there potentially is that homeownership in general, for first-time home buyers and for those that are tight on the down payment, which is a lot of Americans, that's going to go down dramatically, and property ownership is going to stay in a greater percentage to larger corporations, property owners with multiple residents or properties, investors, people that are not limited by that cash scarcity that predominantly first-time home buyers are. So that's one of the unanticipated potential consequences. Now, part of this is, what is a multiple listing service? The National Association of Realtors, which is the governing body for the, whatever it is, 1.8 million realtors in the United States. They were one of the defendants of the suit, essentially, one of the people that were called in. And one of the reasons why they were called in is they were saying, well, hey, as part of this price fixing of commissions, the National Association of Realtors controlled the local multiple listing services, the MLS, which is basically a giant database of properties. And the giant database of properties is where buyers agents real estate agents can go into the multiple listing service and see the properties, pass them to the buyers. Some of those are available fully online that are syndicated to websites like Zillow and Real.com. Other of them are coming soon. They're not yet available for the public, but licensed realtors can see that essentially. So that's part of it, is that process of an MLS. The National Association of Realtors created those originally, invested millions of dollars essentially to create those over time. And that's the database that as a real estate agent I have access to, and I pay dues into that. The other thing that the National Association of Realtors does, which is really interesting, is they're actually there in a lot of ways to protect the consumer. One of the big things that they do is they basically are the governing and the regulatory agent around realtors that prevent someone just to go maverick and to essentially help people buy and sell real estate without the proper licensing and without the proper fiduciary responsibility and ethics that govern us. Right now, being a part of the National, California, and local association of realtors, if for some reason I do something that's unethical, I can essentially be reported to those governing bodies, and I can have severe negative consequences associated for me. So it's an element of accountability that's not perfect. But if you take away the National Association of Realtors, right, they're going to have, if this goes through, they're going to have a massive financial penalty to the organization, which eventually gets passed on to the real estate agents, or if the real estate industry changes and you have a mass migration out of real estate now because there isn't buyer's agency, for example, the National Association of Realtors, their financial resources go down dramatically, and the way they're able to offer the accountability and the resources to the real estate community and to the consumer is based on those fees. Those fees go down. They have less capacity to be able to do that. So we don't know how that's going to shake out. One important factor, though, is like buyer's agency, what is kind of in some ways being attacked right now, is something that we used to not have. I mean, buyer's agency in the U.S. started in the 90s, if I remember correctly. And what that means is, really, we've done it the other way. We've done it where there's just basically real estate agents just representing sellers, where the real estate agent's only fiduciary obligation to do what's in the seller's best interest, not the buyer's best interest, right? I mean, that to me is the absolute worst thing for the consumers as a whole, is to not have great representation. But we tried that before, and we've decided as a society to say that is not healthy, that is not good. We don't want that. We actually want both sides, home buyers in particular, to have licensed guides that are ethical, that have duties of fiduciary duty, duties of loyalty and confidentiality and disclosure, all important factors that buyer's agents have essentially. So now, again, I think a lot of this is the premise is the average consumer doesn't know what the real estate agent does, doesn't know if they're worth their value, so to speak. And here's a really interesting fact. Most people don't know this, but most real estate agents, when they get in the business, they make less than minimum wage. So if they're making this killing that everyone is saying that it's so unfair, like most real estate agents are not even making a survivable income. And the reality is that 86% of real estate agents actually get out of business within the first 2 years, partly because of that. Now, hear me when I say, in Santa Barbara alone, we have 1,600 real estate agents for 1,450 transactions. So we have more real estate agents than transactions in our area based on our high average price point. Now, do I think that's too many? Absolutely. Do I think there should be a healthy winnowing of the real estate agent community? Absolutely. Because in a lot of ways, poor buyer agency is actually almost worse than no buyer agency to begin with. Because in that case, if you have an inexperienced buyer's agent or a buyer's agent that does not know what they're doing, right, isn't properly trained, one of the things that happens is the buyer thinks that they're getting good agency, good fiduciary duty, getting good counsel, and the fact is that they're not. So if one of the byproducts of this ruling is there's a giant shaking that's happening, and some of the least experienced real estate agents get out of the business, right? And that leaves the more experienced real estate agents that are actually adding more value to the consumer stay in the industry. That, to me, is not necessarily a bad outcome. Let me know what you think in the comments, but I don't think that's a bad outcome, because at the end of the day, in my opinion, whether the seller's paying or the buyer's paying or there's a combination of both, people will always pay for value. In the same way that you're going to pay for a brain surgeon, you're going to pay for a wealth manager, you're going to pay for a good attorney when you ever need it. People pay for value, and generally, the wealthier an individual is, the more they understand that the value that a true fiduciary and expert brings, and they're willing to pay more for that value. Now, a couple quick things. I know this video is getting long, but hopefully this is power-packed information. Why should a seller even pay for the buyer agent commission? Well, this is really interesting. Essentially, what buyer's agents do is they generate more buyer activity on a property and more showing on the property. So from a seller's perspective, they have an increased chance of actually selling the property through more buyers seeing it and more offers. There's actually less liability for a seller. A lot of sellers don't understand this, but there's less liability for a seller when a buyer actually has a buyer's agent. Part of that is that buyer's agent and the brokerage that represents that buyer and that agent is with actually assumes liability in the representation of that buyer. So for example, if I walk through a property and I'm not saying certain things to a buyer that I should know that are, for example, wrong with that property, or that I'm seeing that's flagrant or something in the seller disclosures, I actually have liability. My brokerage has liability for that. And so without a buyer's agent, there's actually even more liability on the listing agent and on the seller for different aspects of disclosure and education and some other things. The next one is there's actually buyer's agents do a great thing is that they educate buyers. Most buyers, whether they're experienced or first-time home buyers, do not know the home buying process, do not know the ins and outs, do not know what's standard, do not know what inspections to do not know what a home inspection is and what's in context and what's normal and what's not. And a good buyer's agent is educating the buyer so the buyer is operating in less than this uneducated, erratic fashion and are operating in the standard fashion doing due diligence, making hopefully rational decisions, solving problems, getting connected with other lenders when the online lender isn't doing what they said they were doing, but there's a good local lender that understands the local nuance, whatever it is, they're solving problems. And so you've got more educated buyers who are more likely to stick into escrow. And that's the fourth reason why sellers in some ways should pay for buyer's agent commissions, is it actually decreases the risk of escrow cancellation, which means it's increasing the chance that once they get into escrow, they close escrow, they get their money quicker, they get the experience that they want, they've got less of an emotional roller coaster. Now, what could happen if sellers are actually not allowed to pay for the buyer's agent commission? This is interesting. Lots of things that could happen. One, essentially, a buyer could still negotiate to have a seller credit at the close of escrow an X amount of money for closing costs and for the buyer's agent commission. They could essentially, the seller could be paying for it at the end of the day, just a different semantics, framed a different way. So that could happen. That could happen as well. There's a couple other options. You could just have more buyers that essentially are not represented. We've already talked about the pros and cons of that. I think that is kind of a worst case scenario. Less buyers means a lower sales price. Less represented buyers, like we talked about, means less educated buyers as well. Now, there are some examples of this. Some countries in Europe, you've got Australia, where really, in some ways, there's not buyer's agency, and those buyers just have to kind of represent themselves. And it is, I know agents in Europe and I know agents in Australia, and it's not positive. It's not positive. I think it's extremely beneficial the way that we have it structured in the U.S., and it makes essentially the American dream far more of a reality. Now, as far as like, hey, do the buyer's agents need to get paid as much as they do? Or, hey, are real estate commissions fixed? Do we have to pay 5, 6, 7% for commissions? They're not. And I'll be honest, over the last number of decades, there have been tons of players that have come in the market, real estate experts, real estate companies, trying to disrupt the industry, thinking that real estate agents make too much money, thinking that technology now has allowed this streamlined process and you don't need the same services. And they have tried what we've called discount agencies. I know in Santa Barbara, we had a company that came in to try to do that. They said, hey, we'll represent you, buyer. We'll represent you for as little like 1% or 1.5%. Hey, we'll represent sellers. And the reality is, because, like I mentioned before, most agents are making less than minimum wage, and most agents get out of the business. 86% of the agents get out of the business within 2 years. What happens with those discount agencies are that you have essentially the sellers and the buyers that don't understand the value of real estate agency. And so they're going to the discount agencies and they're just saying, hey, I can save some money. Why not do this? And they're getting even more subpar experience because those are the least paid agents in the business and usually the most inexperienced agents in the business. And then they're having a worse experience. And then it just kind of complicates the problem in the circle. It'll be like, oh, real estate agents don't do anything at all. That's true. The less that real estate agent is paid generally, the less that they're able to offer as service because it becomes more of a unit-based business, more of a volume business. And eventually they almost become just like a real estate attorney just writing up your contract, and you're losing a lot of that fiduciary duty and that guide walking you through that process, negotiating well, helping you with negotiation, helping you with requests for repairs, helping you with due diligence, etc., 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 and it just kind of becomes this never-ending loop. But those players are still out there. Many of them got out of business, but they are still out there, and you always have essentially those options. You always have the option to try to negotiate with a agent and try to get that commission lower. But again, if you cut to the chase, the reality is you get what you paid for with an attorney, you get what you paid for with a brain surgeon, you get what you pay for with a doctor. It's the same thing with a real estate agent. The more that agent is willing to concede on their commission and take a lower cost, it usually means they're offering less value, and you should come in there expecting less value in return. Okay, now, let's talk about consumers, sellers, buyers. What could happen if this does change the industry? And so for sellers, it could be possible that they could just pay for the seller's commission. That is true. That is a possible outcome. So that could, on the surface, save them 2.5% or 3% of the commission. That could be deferred to other people. Now, like we talked about, the byproduct of that is the buyers could drop their offer price by 2.5% to 3% and now have to come up with that, and you're going to have less buyers and some other things. For sellers, I think you're going to have fewer buyers to your property. Like we talked about, you're going to have less educated buyers as well. You're going to have a higher cancellation rate. Oh, this is something we didn't talk about before. I actually think you're also probably going to have a longer days on market time as a seller also. You have fewer buyers coming to the table because they're not being encouraged off the fence by buyer's agents and helping them understand and educating them why is it important for home ownership. What does that do long term for you? So I think that's another byproduct. For buyers, this is interesting. So if you're a buyer and the industry changes, like some news headlines are splashing, I don't think we're going to get there. But if it does change, I think you're going to have buyers with more fear and more uncertainty, more likely to stay on the fence for years and years and years, not pursuing home ownership and essentially deferring their wealth building or their financial foundation later. You're going to have less real estate guides in the business that are representing buyers, and that the guides that are going to be there, you're either going to need to pay for and have additional costs, or you're going to have to go with a discount broker that's going to offer less service. You're going to have a much lower percentage of first-time home buyers that don't have money to pay for buyer representation. And correspondingly, from that perspective, you're doing it on your own, and that fear and uncertainty is going to keep you back from making offers and buying as many properties. And then lastly, again, I think it's going to keep a greater percentage of property in the hands of investors, the wealthy, corporations, etc. Now, I would fall into that category. I am an investor. I have a fairly high net worth. So that doesn't affect me. A lot of what I'm trying to do is help the next generation. We're really passionate about fathering and mothering the generation of Gen Z and Gen Alpha, and helping people understand that it's like, hey, wealth building that comes from a foundation of investing in real estate in many cases. And the more costs there are, the more barriers of entry for that first-time home buyer, the less likely that they're ever going to break through into that financial foundation to build wealth. And they may be renters their whole life. So I don't know. What do you guys think? I know this video went way long. I hope that it helped to see it from many different perspectives. If you are a real estate agent, I definitely, this is not something we can bury our head in the sand about, but I'm also not discouraged because we have a high percentage of market share in our industry. In our local market, we sell a lot of listings. We do tons of great buyer representation, but the value that we offer on the buyer representation is through the roof. We've got like 650 5-star reviews. The buyers and sellers that both work with us see our value, and that's not going to change. We're just going to have to get creative in a worst case scenario if things do change with how we're getting paid, how we're getting the seller to still pay for that. Maybe it's different semantics like we talked about in negotiation. Maybe it's the buyer paying for us directly. Maybe it's reduced services. I don't know. But those of us that are in the business for the long term, we're not going anywhere. And I think in general, the consumers, once they have the education and get past the basic news headlines, they're going to realize that this is not all good for them, and they're going to find some creative ways also to get the buyer representation that, frankly, they know that they deserve. So hang in there, and I think the best thing we can do right now is just to be banding together as agents and educating the consumer on this process so they know the full story and don't get deceived by this media headline painting us as real estate agents as the bad guys and gals, because that is not true. I know so many of you have hearts to really steward your role well, to be neutral advisors, to not be inflationary, to do what's in the best interest of your clients, especially those first-time home buyers. And you are in this business not just for the dollars and cents, but because you are transforming people's lives, helping them build foundational financial future for generations to come. And I am proud of you guys for sticking it out, and I hope you continue to stick out and find more and more ways to add value to the consumer. So, whether you're an agent or a consumer, let me know what you think in the comments. I will try to respond to each and every one. I don't care if you completely disagree with me or completely agree with me. Please share what resonated with you, what concerns you have. If you want me to record follow-up videos, I'm happy to do it. Just let me know. Thanks so much.